Parliament last year. Former federal Labor leader Mark Latham lost the election to John Howard in the 2004 poll, and Tony Windsor, the long-serving Independent MP for the seat of New England, joins us from Tamworth. He's not recontesting this election. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #OzVotes. On the eve of the election, every opinion poll indicates it would take an extraordinary upset to wrest victory from Tony Abbott's coalition tomorrow. Mr Abbott is still trying to insist the vote will be close, but Kevin Rudd's presidential-style bid to win voters with the force of his personality has failed. The personal ratings of the two leaders have reversed, with Mr Rudd's plummeting through the campaign. Now, not only does the resurrected Queenslander look like he won't win any extra seats for Labor in his home state, he might even lose his own. With the coalition's costings finally out, we're back where both leaders began this election campaign, on the issue of who can be trusted with the Australian economy. Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey unveiled the long-awaited numbers yesterday afternoon.
This all puts a lie to Mr Rudd's claim of a black hole of $70 billion. It makes a lie of Mr Rudd's claim that we're cutting everywhere. In fact, we're increasing expenditure in health and education.
The Prime Minister offered this warning to voters on 7:30 last night.
I've just got to say, they make this up as they go along because their objective is, once you get to polling day, for the entire country to be in the dark about where these cuts will hit them, their jobs, and frankly, if they're big enough, hit the overall health of the economy and risk the reality of a recession.
Nick Minchin, Labor says that the coalition is treating voters with contempt with this late and fairly light-on release of costings numbers. Can this damage the coalition?
Look, I don't think so, Eleanor. I think the great damn squib of this election campaign has been Labor's attempt to get the costings issue up as an issue that would affect voting intention. And I think clearly on all the evidence that's completely failed. Nobody believed the $70 billion assertion that Labor put on the table. It was discounted by the media. Then I think the worst moment for Labor in the whole campaign was their stunt last week claiming a $10 billion hole that the departmental secretaries had to come out and blow away. So I don't think this has worked. I think the statement that the coalition put out yesterday just ends that as an issue.
Mark Latham, can a Labor attack on the costings make any difference to the coalition's campaign now?
Well, there's been a fair bit of speculation as to why Joe Hockey was sweating so heavily yesterday. I think he was worried about being expelled from every right-wing think tank in the country. Last year, Hockey said he was going to end the age of entitlement. He was going to wind back the welfare state. And I, for one, thought, oh, well, this is good. We're going to have a real fair dinkum ideological debate in Australian politics. But it turns out not only is Hockey endorsing Labor's big-ticket national insurance scheme for disabled people, not only endorsing Labor's big-ticket schools funding program, he's invented new welfare entitlements of his own, multi-billion-dollar programs for over-generous paid parental leave. They're even going to pay compensation to people for a carbon tax that won't exist, supposedly, under a coalition government. So this is gold-plated welfareism. And Hockey, you have to wonder, why does he bother? I mean, if he really thought you had to end the age of entitlement, why race around for 5 weeks with what is the real damp squib of the campaign, coming up with a position which is big government, big spending, and a fiscal plan which won't get the budget to surplus any faster than Labor. The so-called budget emergency, in terms of the coalition campaign, has become one of the most ludicrous farces you'll ever see in Australian politics.
Bob Brown, there's been a lot of criticism about the $4.5 billion cut to the foreign aid budget. Is that cut justifiable?
Oh, absolutely not. And it's come right. They've kept it right until Thursday night so that they hope they can get away with it. As Tim Costello was saying this morning from Russia, where he's at the C20 conference, that's the equivalent of funding to keep 400,000 children alive who'll otherwise die. It mightn't be a black hole, but that's a black heart. And they've ripped $600 million out of the Murray-Darling Basin, and the need to have a healthy river there into the future. I don't know what South Australians will make of that. It's nastiness coming in, a meanness coming in here at the end, which I think we're going to see a lot of after Sunday, and that's why the Greens are going to be so important in the Senate.
Tony Windsor, particularly with this cut to foreign aid, I guess there's a suggestion that people won't notice it because it's not actually happening to, say, local hospitals and schools. What do you make of that?
has got something coming down the railway line here. I think it is a bit mean-spirited. I think some of the people in the current opposition would recognise the benefit of foreign aid. It's not just about helping people in foreign countries. There's a lot. It's got a lot to do with diplomacy, a lot to do with our position in the world. You know, we are an island physically, but I don't think we want to go down this track of sort of removing ourselves from the globe, which seems to be a common thread that's happening, particularly in relation to the coalition, and the Labor Party is following it where it can as well.
Well, while this campaign may have been disciplined so far, the coalition has executed a big backflip heading into the final day of the campaign. It released a policy for opt-out internet filtering to block adult content on home computers and mobile phones, only to withdraw it hours later. The Shadow Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull first outlined the plan on Triple J.
It's essentially installing that software either in the smartphone or in the modem as a default, which you can switch off, but then that's your call.
And then we have this running away from it at 1,000,000 miles an hour and an attempt to cover it up by saying, oh, it was a typo or a badly worded document, and it's just not true, simply not true. So this really goes to the heart of the policy preparation of the opposition and whether they can be trusted with government.
Well, Tony Abbott took the blame for this morning.
Now, I'm happy to take full responsibility, happy to take full personal responsibility for every mistake that the coalition makes. And frankly, that's what adult government is all about. The buck will stop with me.
Tony Abbott, they're taking responsibility for that, but Nick Minchin, it's not a good look, is it?
Well, it was a campaign hiccup in an otherwise incredibly disciplined campaign. It did surprise me. I was Shadow Communications Minister under Malcolm Turnbull, and the one thing Malcolm and I certainly agreed on was to oppose Labor's internet filter. In fact, I worked with the Greens and Get Up on opposing what Labor was trying to do on internet filtering. So I was very surprised to see this paper come out.
How do you explain it?
Look, it must have been done at a lower level. It was never went through the proper policy approval processes. Somehow it was, somebody thought it had been approved, so it got put out. I mean, if you're going to have one mistake in the whole campaign, and this really is the only one the coalition's had, I guess, you know, it's a reasonable one, and it's been put to bed, and it was right on the eve. Mistakes will occur. Labor's mistakes in this campaign dwarf anything the coalition's done.
Well, Mark Latham, Labor has been warning that we're not seeing the full sort of side of Tony Abbott here, but can it make anything of this at this stage in the campaign?
Oh, well, when you have these blues, the worst time, of course, is in the last 48 hours, so the Liberal Party have suffered for that. They obviously want this to have happened early in the campaign instead of late. But look, I welcome the fact that Malcolm Turnbull has got lots of secret plans for government. I'd like to see a secret plan for an ETS. An ETS, Nick Minchin knows a lot about that. I'm sure that wasn't something they agreed on back when they were buddies in the shadow cabinet. So I encourage Malcolm Turnbull to roll out a whole raft of secret plans for government, starting with an ETS. He might as well keep the mining tax as well. Malcolm Turnbull's a small L Liberal, progressive person. He, of course, is Robinson Crusoe on his side of politics, but if you've got these plans, Malcolm, roll them out, and I, for one, will be applauding hard.
Tony Windsor, you know Tony Abbott well. Do you think that the voters are not seeing the real Tony?
Oh, I don't think they've seen the real Kevin Rudd either. I think both leaders have had a real sort of varnish done to them in terms of the way they've addressed the campaign. I don't think yesterday's thing would make any real difference to the outcome of this election. I think we saw two instances yesterday where senior members of the coalition don't actually agree with the policy they're espousing. You know, Malcolm's on this particular issue, but also Joe Hockey. That wasn't nerves with Joe yesterday. That was Joe articulating some cutbacks, particularly in terms of foreign aid and some of the other things that he didn't actually agree with. And I think there'll be some real issues if we do, under the coalition, and I think they'll win, become this island continent and sort of placate the Pauline Hansons of this world in terms of insular policy. I think there's real dangers in that.
Well, while the coalition may be making some errors in the final 24 hours of this election campaign, Labor has seen its support from voters slide from the first week. Government began its campaign with that bombshell announcement from the newly reinstated Prime Minister Rudd that fellow Queenslander and former Premier Peter Beattie would join him to improve Labor's fortunes in the pair's home state. But recycling former leaders doesn't appear to be working for the party. And this week, there are reports that Labor strategists have been clutching at the tactic of predicting defeat and going for the sympathy vote. Peter Beattie certainly wasn't putting up any pretence when he spoke to 7:30 midweek, calling his position hopeless.
I mean, if you were putting money on a horse, you wouldn't be putting it on me right now. But all I say to all the punters, don't give up just yet. I've won from hopeless positions in the past.
Mark Latham, you were also dealing with tough opinion polls when you were leading the Labor campaign in 2004. How do you think Kevin Rudd would be reacting to these suggestions that he should concede defeat at this point to try to shore up, at least the number of seats that Labor can maintain?
Oh, well, as you know, Kevin hasn't always been my cup of tea, but I know what it's like to be in the last week of a campaign where the polls are saying inside the party and outside that you're going to lose. And I give credit to Kevin Rudd for putting his head down and finishing the campaign stronger than he started it. He hasn't melted down. There hasn't been sort of a hissy fit that many of his critics would have predicted. And, there's just a little bit of polling in the last 24 hours that shows that while the Labor primary vote is very, very low, way too low to win an election, there has been a drop in the coalition primary vote.
Do you think then we could be seeing a Keating-style comeback from Kevin Rudd?
Well, the poll that I shows they're down from about 46 to 43 primary for the coalition, which is the lowest they've been for quite some time. Certainly I think the lowest they've been in this campaign. So, no, I don't think we're seeing a comeback on the Keating scale because the Labor primary vote is way too low. But I think it just points to the fact that in the last week, Rudd probably has had the better of Abbott. These coalition mistakes, the fraud of their costing announcements, I think goes against them. So there's a little bit hope for Labor. But the state machines in New South Wales and Queensland tried this tactic of putting up the white flag and their primary vote dropped. So I think Labor's been right just to bat on with the pretence that they can still win. The problem in pleading for sympathy is threefold. One, there's no sympathy out there in the electorate for any politicians. They're all on the nose, basically. The second problem is it's a bit of a smart political tactic that people see through. And the third problem is if you say that, we're going to get flogged, feel sorry for us, your supporters look at you and think you're so pathetic, you've given up. If you won't fight for yourself, why should we vote for you? So I think the strategy of batting on has been the right one.
Do you think that Kevin Rudd will lose his seat?
Well, you can only go by the hard evidence. Since Stanley Melbourne Bruce, way back when, nobody was used to this idea until the polls turned against John Howard in Bennelong in 2007. And in the end, you've got to follow the hard-nosed data that's out there. I think he's in terrible trouble. I think the fact that Kevin's come back as the leader means that he gets all that negative advertising against him from the Liberal Party, not only nationwide, but in his own seat. It's a multi-million-dollar gift for his Liberal opponent there. And, of course, he's defenceless in that he's not campaigning on the ground in Griffith. He's campaigning right around the nation. So it's a very difficult situation for these vulnerable party leaders. And you'd have to think that Rudd's in serious trouble.
Nick Minchin, are you surprised at the way that Labor has run this campaign?
Well, recycling leaders is always a big risk. I mean, I'm surprised they haven't tried to recycle Mark Latham, but I guess they had to draw the line somewhere. But, recycling Rudd was a huge risk.
We haven't got serious yet, Nick. We haven't got serious yet.
Recycling Beattie, I couldn't believe that. I know Peter Beattie. I was on this program with you last election with Peter, and I'm amazed he accepted this invitation. Look, we on the Liberal side have a professional respect for the Labor Party. They normally are very professional, hard-headed, good campaigners and fearsome opponents. This campaign has been so disjointed and full of mistakes. Part of that, I think, is Kevin Rudd. Bringing a recycle leader at the last minute with Bruce Hawker and them off on doing their own thing and, the campaign headquarters not knowing what's going on from day to day. It's been a shambles of a campaign and they're paying the price for that.
Bob Brown, we heard the Chair of Fairfax, Roger Corbett, earlier this week saying that Julia Gillard should have been left in.
Yeah, and then we found out he was commenting from a Liberal Party point of view. He should have declared that at the outset. I tell you who is the leader that's impressive in this campaign, that's Christine Milne. And she's really hit her straps in the last week, and I'm getting terrific feedback about Christine. And I think Adam Bant's running a fantastic campaign in Melbourne and is going to win.
We'll come to that at the end of the program.
I'm predicting it now. I don't have to wait. But a good feeling for the Greens and very solid polls. as far as the Greens camp is concerned, and I think, again, people are looking for leadership, and more are impressed with the third alternative, the Greens alternative, Christine Milne.
Well, speaking of third alternatives, Tony Windsor, yesterday Tony Abbott was talking about the independents wrecked the last parliament, let's not let them knock off the next one. How do you feel, as a key member of that minority government, that no one seems to have a good word for it?
Well, Tony would have been quite happy to have had a minority government if he'd been chosen, so there's a little bit of a bit of hill there that he was incapable of negotiating with players. Our parliament is made up, and our Senate is made up of a whole range of elected representatives. This mandate business that they keep rabbiting on about is nonsensical in a lot of ways, I think. But Mr Abbott had his chance. He'll probably get a chance in this one. Personally, I hope he doesn't get a majority in the Senate, because there's a lot of issues out there, and a lot of them are regional issues. The coal seam gas issue is an extraordinary issue where we need objective scientific analysis, and the Commonwealth should play a role there. Tony Abbott is saying, oh, well, under the guise of removing red tape, we'll give it all back to the states. Well, I think that's been the problem, is the states have been under the charge of the mining sector rather than giving an objective analysis. So I think the parliament we've just come from, and I think history will treat it quite well, because if you look at some of the significant longer-term issues that this parliament dealt with, and fairly tenuous numbers right through, and Tony exacerbated that, of course, but there's a lot of policies, and I won't go through them, that will have long-term impacts, and I would have thought that's what parliaments were supposed to be about, rather than the short-term negativity and the short-term cycle.
Well, while the voters may yet deliver a surprise, it's highly likely that the coalition will win majority government tomorrow. But just who will control the Senate is another question. Record numbers of minor party candidates are contesting this election, and their preference swaps are making it hard for even the seasoned political strategists to identify where the numbers will fall. Queensland's Clive Palmer is making very bold claims for the success of his Palmer United Party.
Interstate and right across the country, there's a massive move on to vote for our party, and it indicates at the moment that we'll have senators and House of Representative members in all the different states of the Commonwealth of Australia. So people are not satisfied.
Well, I think we can confidently predict that he won't win seats across the country, but he might win a Queensland Senate seat and the balance of power in the upper house. Now, Nick Minchin, when Clive Palmer came on the World Today yesterday, he made a Joseph Stalin reference when he talked about his last meeting with Tony Abbott. That doesn't bode well for negotiating with the Clive Palmer candidate, does it?
Well, I think all sensible Australians would be praying that the Palmer United Party has absolutely no representatives in the Parliament. I think it's probably something Bob and I would agree on. As you say, the only chance that would appear on the basis of the polling is a Senate seat in Queensland. I hope that's not the case. This guy is a complete buffoon, and there should be no place for him or his representatives in the Australian Parliament.
Now, you said in the first week of the election on this program that you thought that the coalition had no chance of controlling the Senate. Given the way the election campaign has been going, are you more confident now?
Oh, no, there's no chance of the coalition having a majority in the Senate. In terms of the seats that are up this time and where we're at now, we cannot possibly win majority. It's still unknown how the Senate will play out. At the moment, the Greens and Labor Party have, I think, 40 seats. I still think it's likely that they will have 38, which is a blocking position. Now, that's going to be difficult for a coalition government to work with, but I hope that the Greens, like the Democrats, are prepared to negotiate with an incoming coalition government, if in fact that is the situation we face. But there will be a balance of power held either by the sort of Xenophons, Madigans, and maybe a Katter Party candidate, or the Greens. And I hope, if that's the case, the Greens are prepared to negotiate with an incoming government.
Bob Brown, do you agree that there's no chance that the coalition can control the Senate?
No, I don't at all. I think they've got a cipher in the DLP, Senator Madigan, and more so with Nick Xenophon in South Australia, giving his preferences across to give a leg up to the coalition getting another seat there. And that's why Sarah Hanson-Young being re-elected in South Australia is going to be so pivotal to the face of the new Senate.
You just mentioned Nick Xenophon. Late this morning, Nick Xenophon accused the Greens of lying and running a scare campaign against him. Let's hear a little of what he said.
I used to believe the Greens were a party of integrity, but the lies they've been publishing has shown that they are willing to do or say anything for political advantage. I would rather lose an election than have to lie to win. I can't say the same about the Greens. Let me be clear, my Senate preferences are split right down the middle if and only if I have excess votes to be distributed. I get my support overwhelmingly from Labor and Liberal supporters, which is why I split my preferences equally.
Well, Brown, this is directly targeting you, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and he's wrong. The fact is that Sarah Hanson-Young's giving her preferences to Nick Xenophon. He's giving his preferences to the Liberals and to Labor, where they're going to be sopped up.
He's splitting.
And Liberal and Labor. He's done the wrong thing by progressive voters, and as you can see there, he's angry, but he's really angry with himself because he sold out to progressive voters, and more South Australians know that, and are going to vote for Sarah Hanson, who's done the right thing.
Look, finally, I'd like to invite you all...
Finally, that's about as much as I think I can upload. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Vote Green! Ciao.